Welcome to our channel, $1 Million Made Easy. On this channel, we create spreadsheets that help run numbers so you can see where you might be in the future. We look at the actual numbers, the actual historical returns of the S&P 500. In this video, we want to look at compound interest. It's been called the eighth wonder of the world. And I recently saw this quote by not sure how you pronounce it. Rimmer Sethi, he's a financial author. He says the power of compounding is something that is truly hard to understand until you see it over and over again. Folks, I'd like to add over and over and over again. I want you to see this startling stat. This is something I found historical data from 1928 to 2022, which would be like a 94-year period. Nobody's going to be beginning an investing career planning on 94 years of investing. But look at the difference. Just these different returns can be compounding effect. That's what we're trying to point out in this video. Is if you can be in it for the long term, and we're not going to be looking at 94 years, we're going to be looking at a lot shorter periods like 30, 35 years, but pretty much during your working career, what you can do over 40 years. But look at this, folks. This is annualized return for the stock market. If you would have put just $1,000 in just one time, what would that have grown to over the last, from this period, 94-year period? It would have grown to $7.617 million. And yet, if you got an annualized return of half of that, you'd think you'd get half of this right here, but that's not how compound interest works, folks. Look at this. Half the interest rate, you'd have $85,000, that same $1,000 over this same period of time. In T-bills, with this kind of interest rate, would have only had this kind of end result, $20,000. Basically, this was 3 times as much, but boy, look at the difference between $20,000 and $7.617 million. And I want to show you, I just want to run some numbers for you just to show you. Let's say, for example, let's just say you have $100,000. And these numbers are just for illustrative purposes only. Let's say you're getting a 4% return. Where would you be after? Again, in this video, we want to look at these kind of time periods, 35, 40, 45 years. Where would you be after those periods of time? That $100,000 with a 4% CD or a 4% return on your money. After 35 years, you'd have just short of 400,000. After 40 years, you'd have just 480,000, and after 45 years, you'd have 584,000. I specifically want to look at this 45-year period because the name of our channel is $1 Million Made Easy, and I wanted to get young people, maybe when you're first starting out your working career, maybe you're 20 years old, you do have 45 years until you reach retirement age. If you could just put away a small sum of money, first of all, we're just going to look at the difference just to show the stark contrast between 4% and even something like 8%. I'm going to change this to 8%, so all the returns will be 8% going down through here. Okay, so right now we see after 45 years, you have 584,000. Watch what happens when I change this to 8. You think it'd be double this, right? You think, well, it'd be a little bit over $1 million. But watch what happens when I change it to 8. Set it to 8%. Now I've got 8% going down through it. Now after 45 years, you would have $3.192 million. All we did was change it from 4%, which was 584,000, I think it was, to double that interest rate. You'd be $3,192,000. Now, that's not how compounding works in your general investment, where you don't start out with a certain amount and not add another dime. But we want to look at a realistic scenario. Let's say, for example, you're starting out, you're 20 years old, and you can save $300 a month. That would be 6% of somebody making $60,000 a year. We could use any amount you want. I just want to show you the difference between 4% on $3 million or $300 a month. Let's go back here and show you that. This is the numbers right here. After 45 years, you would put in more than that $100,000. You would put in $162,000 over that time period. But look how much you would have after 45 years. For example, from age 20 to 25. This is a 4% rate. You may need to set that. Sorry about that. This is a 4% rate. You'd have $435,000. And if you got 4% on that's $300 for a 45-year period. Watch what happens when I change it to 8. Right now it's 435,000. Going to set this to 8%. Now it's 1.391, over 3 times as much. You doubled the interest rate, but the end result after this period of time, you more than tripled it. Now it takes the time. You need to, this is the graph that we're actually looking at, showing you how it takes off as time goes on. Over a 45-year, we're looking at the 45-year graph at this point. 45 years. Let's go ahead and, there you can see the graph a little bit better there. Now I want to do one more thing. I want to actually do the stock market because that's what we do on this channel. We run numbers using the actual historical returns for the S&P 500. And I want you to watch this as we change it to stock market returns instead of this 8% CD or a 4% return or whatever. We're going to actually use stock market returns. Going to reset this, and you're going to see all the returns change from 8% to these are the actual returns. This was 1925 returns. If we had 1925 returns on this $300 a month, where would you be after 45 years if you had returns like this? None of our returns going forward are going to be identical to this, but look at this, $3.387 million. But 1925 numbers, look at 1926 numbers, the numbers change, 3.2, 3.5. And look at 1929 numbers. You'd think it'd be horrible. $3.3 million after 45 years, even though you start out with these kind of returns. Because the market inevitably comes back. These are the actual returns we're using. Yeah, you start out with these kind of years, but then you got some of these years. Again, if you're in it for the long term, if you can be in it for 35, 40, or 45 years and catch some of these good returns, because in the last 100 years, 75 years have been up years, 26 years have been down years. And so we like to run these numbers showing all the different scenarios. In this case, what I'm going to do is update this for every single year for the last 100 years from 1925 to 2024. The graph's going to be a bumpy ride. I mean, you can see right here, this is a 1925 graph. 1929 graph, bumpy ride, but you notice what it's doing? It's shooting straight up. This is a 45-year period, but if you could just invest $300 for the next 45 years and got returns like depression-type returns, look at what you would have after 45 years. But I'm going to go ahead and update this for you for every single year. This shows us the results for every year from 1925 on, what you would have if we had returns like these years. For example, here's the 1925 numbers. There's the 3.387. There's the 3.387. 1929 numbers, 3.3 million. 1929 numbers, where am I at here? 1929, 3.304 million. I've actually color coded. 100% of the time you have over a million. 100% of the time color-coded in blue, you'd have over 2 million, and 84% of the time color-coded in gold going down through, you'd have over $3 million in the account, just investing $300 a month. I've color-coded. You can look at these other different time periods, but you can see when you start getting out here, that's when you get into the millions of dollars, investing just $300 a month. We could change any of these numbers. What did we have when we did 8%? 8% numbers. Let me click on this. There you can see it right there. 8% return on $300 a month. You'd have 1.391 million. Did you notice something, folks? 8% CD or an 8% return on your money sounds like a really good deal. But if you're in it for the long run, folks, you'd have over almost $1 million more. And this, folks, this right here, this red is the worst case scenario in the last 100 years. If you would have been in the S&P 500, you would have 2.207 million. That actually, if you go down through here, you'd have to go down here to 1964. 1964, those are the returns. 1964, let me go back to the stock market. 1964, there's the 2.207 million. And why was 1964 the lowest you're going to find this whole column? Because 45 years from 1964, guess where that ended up? 1964, 45 years later, if you had returns like that, you ended up right here. So in other words, if you did it just 1 year earlier or 1 year later, your numbers would be a lot better than these numbers. This is looking at the worst case scenario. Let me change it to 1965 and watch this number right here, 2.207. Then you have 2.5 million the year before, You have 3.7 million, that 37% drop. But here's the median. This is what I want you to catch, the median in this column, meaning half the time you had more than that in this column. This is again after 45 years, half the time you have less, you have 3.701 million, as opposed to an 8% CD, you'd have 1.391 million. The key point is, yeah, it looks really nice just to have a straight uh, curve like this going up here, as opposed to if we actually take the returns for 1963 and even 1964 will do. It was a bumpy ride, but look where you ended up, way higher than that 1.3 million, which would be right down here. It drops, it bounces all over the place. We could pick any year you want, but you're going to see the graph, how it takes off like this. Eventually, we had numbers like 1956 going forward. You would end up with basically $6 million. In fact, the best case scenario for the 45-year period would be $6.61 million. The point is, compound interest doesn't really make sense. It kind of doesn't make sense to your brain that going from a 4% to an 8% uh, return on your money. You would think it would double it. No, a lot more than doubles it. And if you take into account the stock market, which has averaged over 10% in the last 100 years, that's why these numbers are so huge. And even in the worst case scenario, you'd have basically almost $1 million more than what you have if you just had an 8% CD, like we saw right here. 8%, you have 1.391. Worst case scenario being in the S&P 500, which was 1964 numbers, we saw them right here. You would have, you'd have $2.2 million as opposed to 1.391. Compound interest, get it in there and let it work for you. Even amounts like $300, which is 6% of somebody making $60,000. And look where you can be in 40 or 45 years, all these numbers, even the 40-year worst case scenario is 1.426. 35-year, the worst case scenario, 870. Now, we always like to take into account inflation. I always include this in my spreadsheets. This is the buying power right up here of what these amounts would have. We have a 3% inflation rate, because we have to be realistic. This 2.207 is not going to have the same buying power in 45 years that it does today, but still, it's going to be a very, very healthy sum. The median right here, 3.7, is still going to have the buying power of basically $1 million in 45 years. We run all kinds of different numbers here, but in this video, we just wanted to show you the importance of getting in there and letting it work for you, remembering these kind of numbers. Again, this is for 94 years. We're not looking at that. But if you can be in it for 40 or 45 years, you're going to see this kind of discrepancy between a 10% return on your money and a 5% return on your money, between a 4% return on your money and 8% return on your money. And then what you actually get in the worst case scenario is right here. But that's what we do on this channel. We love running numbers for people. Please consider subscribing. Please share. Please like these videos. Let people know there's a channel out there that'll run numbers for them and share concepts like this. Something as simple as right here. Compound interest, the eighth wonder of the world. It's something you really don't realize till you actually look at the numbers, which is exactly what he was saying here. The power of compounding is something that's truly hard to understand until you see it over and over, and I would say over and over and over again when you see these kind of numbers. Thanks for watching.